Okay, hello, and thanks for inviting me. As Andy mentioned, we met at a Turing Festival in Edinburgh in November, and excuse me, it's too early. And it was brilliant. It was brilliant to go to an in-person conference and actually see real people face to face. And really energizing, mostly just, because you get to meet awesome people, you get to hang out. It's not just talking at a screen, is what the last couple of years has felt like. It's much harder to meet people at online conferences, which is really in line with what I'm going to talk about today, which is this book called Social, which is by Matthew Liebman and is also based on a lot of research that he's done with Naomi Eisenberg as well. So this book is about the inherent need that all humans have to connect with other people and how that need for social interaction influences our lives. It's based on peer-reviewed scientific research, and backed up with stories and examples. So I love to read stuff that has, is based in something that can be pointed to that is peer-reviewed and is scientific, but also echoes a lot of the things that I've seen. So it's really influenced the way that I think about the working environment and the work that I do, which is generally a lot about people and connecting people, and particularly the work that I do around communities of practice. So there are a lot of takeaways in this book, and I'm going to go through my 5 I wanted to share with you today. So number 1, there you go. The first thing is that Maslow had it wrong. So you may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Sometimes people put a little bit at the bottom that says Wi-Fi. Maslow's hierarchy of needs was introduced in 1943 in a paper called A Theory of Human Motivation. And it's a motivational theory in psychology, which comprises of a 5-tier model of human needs, here represented by 3 tiers. So it's depicted as this hierarchical levels within a pyramid. So in these 5 levels, the levels, what Maslow said is those levels lower down have to be satisfied before individuals can attend to the needs higher up. So he said at the bottom, there are physical needs, which Andy in his red line has underlined here for some reason. Those physical needs are things like physiological needs like food and clothing, safety needs like permanent shelter and job security. In the middle, we have, so those have to be attended to before we can reach social needs, which is friendship, love, belonging needs. And at the top, which is meaning, which is esteem, so things like respect, status, recognition, freedom, and self-actualization, which is the desire to be the most that you can be. So the question is, do we have this wrong? If you can just flip to the next slide, Andy, there you go. Big question. Yes, we have it wrong. So a bunch of social psychologists say that we do have it wrong. And actually, because of the way that we've developed as humans have developed, we have these big brains. We are born whilst we're still maturing. So it takes us a number of years before we can actually look after ourselves, unlike some other mammals that, are born and can get up and start feeding themselves fairly quickly. Because we're born without the ability to meet our own physical needs, those social needs are super fundamental, that we need to connect with other people. We need shelter and belonging. We need other people, usually our parents, to help provide those physical needs. So those social needs are fundamental and at the bottom of that pyramid. And that doesn't go away for our entire lives. It helps us to strive and it helps us to grow. So fundamental is those social needs to connect with other people. The second takeaway that I have is that the FOMO is real. This wonderful sad panda. So Matthew Liebman, Naomi Eisenberg ran an experiment to understand more about what social pain looks like in our brain. So they put people in an fMRI scan and ran this experiment. So it went like this. So imagine, if you will, you're playing a game in a park with 2 other friends and you're throwing a ball to each other. Imagine it's the summer and remember, and it was warm, it's sunny outside, and you're having a great time, you're throwing this ball to each other, trying not to drop it. And then imagine that your friends, you know, for whatever reason, they just stop throwing the ball to you, and they keep throwing the ball to each other, and you just not throwing it to you anymore, and you don't really know why. You're just watching them having fun, and now you're not in that anymore. So they played this scenario to people, and what they found is that the areas of the brain that lit up when people felt, you know, left out, felt this social pain, were the same parts of the brain that light up when people feel physical pain. So what they found out is that what they discovered is that emotional pain, social pain, affects us in the same way that physical pain does. So maybe, you know, we've all probably been through some emotional, some social pain. It's as although we can't see it, it's as relevant as physical pain. So the FOMO is real, and being left out really does hurt us. Conversely, just in some of the research that I've done, working in groups can actually reduce our pain threshold. So there was some research done in Oxford, I think, with a rowing team that showed that when people were rowing together, it decreased or increased their pain threshold. So working in social groups can actually reduce our pain threshold. So my next takeaway is that not being supported can feel like rejection. So this isn't actually a big part of the book, but it was a quote that when I read it, it kind of really struck me. And it's really informed also my work and some of my work on communities of practice and the kind of support that people need when they're working in organizations. So what it talks about is this idea that if you don't feel supported by people, that actually feels like you're being rejected by people. And this can happen in a number of different places. It might happen, you know, in outside work and friendship groups, but it definitely happens inside work as well. And when I read this, it kind of struck me because it felt like I've experienced this before. I've been in places where I don't feel like I'm supported, and I particularly kind of attribute this in some of the conversations I have with organizations about how important good line management or mentorship is, because when we have somebody that you're kind of going to that's supposed to help you and they're just not, and they're not interested, it does feel like you're being rejected. And I have left organizations because I feel like I just don't have support. I once had a line manager that he decided, and he would state this to people, that if he failed people's reviews, or if he told them they weren't performing well enough, that would motivate them to do better. And this was it. He would tell people this, and then tell them they weren't doing good enough. I don't find that a motivator, except for motivating me out of the door. So added to that as well, there was some research done in 2018 called No Employee in Ireland, and talks about workplace loneliness. And this was pre-pandemic, when people were face to face. And that showed that the idea, when people don't have enough support, or they don't have time to form proper relationships, trusted relationships in the workplace, it really affects their job performance. They don't feel safe to speak. They don't contribute as much. So this really does affect us personally, and it also affects our organizations. And you can just imagine that this is increased whilst people are working from home, or whilst we don't get to mingle or meet other people in our workplaces. So my next point is a takeaway from the book, is that our brains are developed for social connections. So this little graph here is encephalization in mammals. Encephalization is a relative brain size measure that's defined as a ratio between how big a brain is to predicted brain mass for an animal. So we have a certain amount of our brain that is given to, you know, making our bodies work. And that extra bit, so we have a lot more extra bit of our brain that is on top of that. So it's here it gets technical, and I'm going to lose this slightly, so apologies if anyone knows this knows this more in depth than I do. But a lot of this bit of our brain is given over to our social network and understanding how we connect with other people. Cats thinking they're perfect, yes. There's also a relation here towards our default network when we're not thinking, which most of us are thinking all the time about stuff. When we go into a relaxed state, it's that it lights up the same bit of our brain as our social network. So our kind of default state is social, and the size of our brain, it relates to the size of our social network. There is an evolutionary anthropologist called Dunbar who's studied group sizes in primates and humans, and that size of our brain and the size of our prefrontal cortex as a direct correlation to the size of the social groups that we tend to be in. There's tons of stuff out there that Robin Dunbar's written if you're interested in looking at that. And I am always interested in social group sizing and organizational group sizing. I could talk about that more, but I won't right now. So my last takeaway here is that social connections make our workplace better. So all of this for me kind of really relates to how we connect with other people in the workplace. We need to connect with other people in our lives, and we need this in the workplace as well. It really does affect our experiences, affect our confidence, and affect our motivation. I talked a little bit about workplace loneliness affecting our performance and how much of ourselves we can bring to work. There was also some economist called Grieve who studied 3 Italian companies and looked at human capital, so things like skill, knowledge and experience versus social capital, which is the strength of the connections that we have between other people, and found that social capital accounted for a large amount of benefits in productivity. So the organizations where people are more connected to each other, more kind of socially connected, have more trusted relationships, do much better than organizations where people don't. So which points to those organizations where everyone is still working from home or not connecting socially in the same way. It has a real impact on organizations. And there's lots of work out there. We can also look at the work of Dr. Anita Williams-Woolley and the Google Project Aristotle, amongst others, to see that groups, when people get together and they have these social relationships, they're more intelligent than the sum of the individual's intelligence. So in our groups, we are more effective. We are more effective when we're connected and we're collaborating with other people. And as well, in the workplace, it's much easier to do something if you have a trusted relationship with somebody else. So, it's less blind spots, more sense checking. It's particularly important, I said, again, when we're in this what feels like a never ending pandemic. Just quickly to summarize before we move on. So fundamental need is to connect with others. The FOMO is real. Not being supported feels like rejection. We as humans, our brains are developed for social connections, and social connections makes our workplace better. Thank you.